There was a house that my family lived in for about a year or so when I was a teenager that I really didn't like. At first, I really didn't know what it was that bothered me about it. However, from the beginning, there was something about that house that always rubbed me the wrong way. I was sort of scared of being alone in that house, at least to a degree. It wasn't a terrified feeling exactly though, and I didn't try to avoid being in the house alone or anything, especially when my father and stepmom would go visit relatives, and I didn't have to go with them. On those days, however, my dad would have a lot of beer, and when he did that, he would always overstay his welcome and not get back until very, very late. That was perfectly fine with me. This was the late 1980s. I was 14 years old, and the house we lived in was quite beautiful. It had a fully sized but unfinished basement, but it was a bit dark and freaky down there because it was completely underground. The walls were cinder blocks, and there were a lot of boxes and some old furniture down there. There was nothing really particularly scary, but there was something off about it. I wasn't scared of the dark either. It was just a feeling I would get whenever I was down there. It always felt like there was something or someone watching me from behind the furniture or something. The worst part was going up the stairs though. I always wanted to run up the stairs because I got that feeling that something was behind me and wanted to chase me. It was even worse though because I was always imagining a hand would reach up from between one of the boards and grab my ankle as I ran up them. The only reason any of that is important is to give you some idea of what it was like living in the house. It was also sitting on top of a hill out on a ridge in a huge yard. You would always be able to see it atop one of the other hills, before it descended and then ascended up several hills it had to get over to get to the house. I wasn't the only person who was scared of that basement either. My sister, who was 5 years younger than I was absolutely terrified of it. Also, though, being a 9-year-old at the time, she had a much more active imagination and belief in the scary things. She was much more specific about what she thought was going after her in the basement than I was. She insisted there was an old witch that lived down there who hid behind the stairs. It was a pretty chilling thought. Despite the fact that the house could be very creepy sometimes, I did like living there. Being 14, I enjoyed the time that I could spend in the house alone. I found myself very rarely going to visit the relatives, and often instead preferring to remain home by myself. It was on a late summer night that I had the scariest experience ever in that house. I was sitting there in the living room. Our couch was against the back wall, and the TV was parallel from the wall. To the left of the couch was a very large picture window. That was from where you would be able to see down the driveway, and able to see other cars driving on the hills towards you. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning. I was watching TV with the lights off. I think the show was Freddy's Nightmares, an anthology horror show that was hosted by the character Freddy Krueger. It wasn't really that scary, but I enjoyed watching it, mostly for Robert Englund. I never exactly knew when my parents would get home, but whenever I noticed a set of headlights out the corner of my eye, I instinctively turned my head and looked out the big picture window. I don't remember what the episode was about, but I was watching it pretty intently. Then, though, I noticed there was a flash of light outside at a distance, and I assumed it was a car. I quickly turned my head to see if it was my parents' car. Now this happened very quickly. As I turned my head to the left, I noticed a dark shadow in the corner to the left. It barely registered, as I was trying to see if the car was coming. However, whatever that light was, it was definitely not my parents' car. As the realization hit me that it was not their car, what I had seen in the corner next to the TV also registered with me. My head jerked back to the right to look directly in that corner. Although it was dark, I saw an old, scraggly woman standing there. She was wearing this black dress, and she had long, unkempt gray hair. She was holding her hands together in a ball in front of her, and the worst part was that she was staring directly at me. Startled, I jumped into a crouched position on the couch, my feet underneath me. I quickly scanned my eyes across the room, looking to see if there was anyone else other than the old woman there. I quickly noticed that there wasn't, and returned my gaze to the corner she had been standing in. When I did, she was no longer there. I wasn't exactly sure how to react. For who knows how long, I remained on the couch, still with my feet on the cushions. My eyes scanned everywhere in the room and the hallway again, wondering if she had quickly darted away somewhere. However, I cannot figure out for the life of me how she would have done that. Part of me wanted to go run and turn the lights on, while the other didn't want to move from the couch. I backed myself into a corner and kept watching TV. We didn't have a remote-controlled TV back then, so I didn't dare get up to change the channels. I simply remained on the couch waiting until my family got home. I couldn't get the picture of that woman out of my head though. Although seeing her was very scary in itself, that wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was realizing that the scraggly old woman looked like a witch, and remembering that my sister had always claimed to see a witch in the basement, hiding behind the furniture. I've always approached matters of the supernatural from a very specific viewpoint. I don't believe people are lying to me when they tell me about encounters they've had. After all, there are many things that can be explained as supernatural seeming, but they really aren't in reality. I tend to believe the stories, but not that they're otherworldly in any way. If there was objective proof that something supernatural occurred, I suppose I would take that proof at face value at such a time it was presented. I just felt I needed to get that out of the way. This story appears to be supernatural in nature, but that doesn't mean it actually is. There could be a lot of other explanations for what happened to me that I'm just not thinking of. This happened when I was a teenager, and it was the first time I was left home alone in a new house. We had moved into the neighborhood about 6 months before this took place. I was 15 at the time. I had switched schools in the middle of the school year, so I really hadn't had time to make many new friends. I was pretty fine with that though. My family went out to visit relatives, but I didn't go. I don't recall exactly why, only that it was my choice in the end not to. I wouldn't claim that our house was out in the country. It was out of town, but not really in a very rural setting. We did have a well in our backyard. Or actually, I guess it was more like a lot. It was a large field behind our house, but it was supposedly part of the property. There was this old-timing looking well in that field. You know, just like you might see in a cartoon or a horror movie. I'm not the type of person who scares very easily, so I wasn't worried at all being home by myself for a few days. While I was at home, I spent most of my time in the darkened living room watching things on television. On the third night I was in the house, I was staying up late and watching something on late-night TV. It was nothing out of the usual. I definitely remember it wasn't scary either, so my imagination hadn't been worked up at the time or anything. Around 2 in the morning, I went to let our dog out into the backyard. There was nothing unusual about that either. The dog went around, did what it had to do, and then came back into the house. I gave her a treat, which was customary, and then went to close the door. Bradley. I thought I heard a voice whisper my name behind me as I turned back into the house. It was very eerie and caused me to turn around. It seemed like someone had just whispered it right into my ear, but when I whirled around, nothing was there. The light was on in the backyard. I scanned it as far as the light would allow me to. Other than the porch light, however, there was no other light source out there, not even a moon that night, and I couldn't see anyone. I got one of those chills. I'm sure you know the ones I'm talking about. It's involuntary and begins in your spine until a shiver just racks your entire body. It was also over nearly as quick as it began though, so I turned around and went to walk back into the house again. Bradley. I heard the voice whisper in my ear once more. This time I jumped and quickly turned back to look behind me. Just as before, my eyes scanned everywhere in the yard. The first time I'd heard the whisper, I could have well written it off as my imagination. I knew this time, though, that I had just heard it for sure. After once again not seeing anything or anyone out in the yard, I turned and got back into the house. This time I was a lot less comfortable than I was the first time. I went into the house quickly, locked the screen door first, shut the back door, and then locked and bolted the door as well. I stood there for a moment and realized the kitchen window, which was facing the backyard, was opened. I went to close it, and when I leaned over to push the window closed, I heard it for a third time. I shut the window quickly and locked it. I turned on the lights in the kitchen, in the hallway, in the living room, and everywhere in the house I would be going. I had just heard someone whispering my name 3 times. The only comfort I had was that each time it had come from outside the house. I felt good locking myself in. I tried to go back to the TV and do my best to relax. It wasn't easy at first. Every time I thought I noticed something out of the corner of one of my eyes out of one of the windows, I found myself jumping up and getting paranoid. It took a long time before I was relaxed enough that I was able to concentrate on anything else. I don't think that I was fully able to relax at any point in the night, although I did try my best to. I eventually did fall asleep on the couch in the living room while I was watching something else on TV, but my sleep was a restless one. The following day, I decided in the light of day that I should go out and look around in the backyard and the field behind it. I didn't really like going out in there because it was not mowed or kept in any way. There was a lot of brush, briars, and thorns. For some reason, though, I felt that in order to be as thorough as I could, I should really look back through there, too. When I saw the well, which was boarded on the top, I felt a strange and very foreboding feeling. Yeah, that could have something to do with the prominence wells have in scary stories. It could have just been because it was a crumbling relic from the past. I don't know, but it made me very uneasy. I turned, though, to go ahead and walk back to the house. As I turned with my back to the well, I heard the whisper one last time. I heard a voice whisper my name in my ear from behind me. I ran faster than I've ever run before. I got into my house and locked myself in, and anything else out. I have no idea if what happened was related to the well in any way. I never went back to it again. I never heard that whisper again either. I also never heard any stories about the well. Nothing like a child dying in it or anything like that. All I know is what I heard that day, and that was enough to keep me away. I was walking home from a friend's house when I was younger, when I had a very scary experience. This was in the summer, plus it was during the daytime as well. We lived far out on this rural route in the hills. So far out, in fact, that it took a 90-minute bus ride from home to school and back again. Most of the kids in the school didn't live out in the country like we did. They lived in town, so the bus that came and got us never had a whole lot of children on it. Furthermore, the houses out there weren't very close together. My buddy Joey was the closest friend I had, and even getting to his place was quite the trek. Occasionally, we would get one of our parents to take us to the other's house. More often than not, though, we would just walk there. During the summertime, because we would spend the night at each other's house so often, and also because we were off school and our parents were at work, we would often have to walk to the other's house in order to do anything. The previous night, I had stayed the night at Joey's house. We had played some video games and watched some scary movies. You know, the typical sort of stuff a 13-year-old boy liked to do. I knew the next day that both of my parents would be at work, so I had to get home around 1 p.m. at the latest in order to check on our dog. It was a clear and very bright day. I was walking along the gravel road. There were ditches dug on both sides of the road, and beyond the ditch varied amounts of trees and bushes and such. At some points it was easy to see out up into the hills, but other times any view was blocked by the branches. It was a hot summer day. I heard the strangest noise while I was out walking. I was used to all the sounds of the country, and I had lived out there all my life. This sounded oddly like human giggling, though. Although there are some animals who can make human-like noises, this was not one that I had heard before. It absolutely sounded like there was someone out in the woods laughing. It caused me to stop for a moment and look around. I couldn't exactly tell where it had come from, just up in the woods someplace. I started walking again when I suddenly felt something hit me right on the back of the head. It smarted pretty badly, and I reached up to feel my head where I had gotten hit. Looking down at my hand, I could see there was a little bit of blood on it. Only a really small amount, though. I assumed whatever had hit me had been a rock, but there was so much gravel on the road I didn't try to look for it. I started walking again, and then, once again, I heard that weird giggling coming from out of the forest somewhere. I only stopped for a moment, looking around at the surroundings and wondering just what was going on this afternoon. As I started to begin walking again, I once again felt something hit me right in the back of the head. This time the pain was a lot sharper. I almost stumbled over when it happened. Distressed, I looked around, hoping to see where the hit had come from. This time, by looking around on the ground, I noticed a large piece of gravel with a little bit of blood on it. I immediately guessed it had to be the one that just hit me. I went to pick up the rock and take a closer look. As I was sitting there holding it, I heard the giggling sound again for a third time. It was all just too much at that point. It was very creepy, and I had no idea what was going on. I dropped the rock and began running up the hill as fast as possible. I ran all the way until I was at the driveway to our house. At that point, I was getting cramps from running so hard, and I had to stop and slow down. I was still extremely scared though. Luckily, I got inside before I heard that noise again.